After the resignation of its prime minister, what's next for Japan and what impact could it have in the region and beyond? Hello, I'm Mike Walter filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced last Friday that he's stepping down after leading his country for almost 8 years. Abe, who's 65 years old, says he's resigning because of ill health. He will remain in office until a successor is named. Japan's longest-serving prime minister says he wants to ensure a new leader can focus fully on the coronavirus epidemic and other major challenges.
Given my illness and treatments, and my health is not perfect, I cannot let these conditions compromise my political decisions or making results. Now that I am not able to fulfill the mandate from the people with confidence, I have decided that I should no longer occupy the position of the Prime Minister. I have decided to step down from the post of the Prime Minister.
What impact will his resignation have in Japan? What will it mean for Japanese relations with China and the United States? To discuss all of this, joining us now via Skype from Washington, D.C. is Shihoko Goto. She is Deputy Director for Geoeconomics and Senior Northeast Asia Associate at the Woodrow Wilson Center's Asia Program. With us, too, from Beijing, Einar Tangen. He's a political and economics affairs commentator. Also joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. is Harlan Ullman. He's chairman of the Killowen Group and a senior advisor to the Atlantic Council. And with us, too, is Sourabh Gupta. He is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China-America Studies. And want to welcome all of you to the broadcast. Shihoko, why don't I start with you? Abe leaving for health reasons. Were you surprised at the announcement? And what will his legacy be? And what will this mean for the country?
Yes, I think we were all surprised by it. There had been speculation about his ill health for a few weeks now, but I think very few people would have thought that he would resign at this time. The year 2020 has been a hard time for all world leaders in light of the global pandemic, but for Abe it's been particularly hard. But when we look at the legacy of Abe, in a nutshell, what he has provided is stability. Stability politically for Japan, and stability for the world as well at a time when there is so much uncertainty in leadership and direction.
You mentioned 2020 has been a bad year for just about everybody, I would say, but for Abe, it was not a good one. I think just last month there was a poll out, about 60% of the respondents said that they were not happy with his handling of the coronavirus. There's been charges of cronyism, there's been scandals. Talk to us a little bit more about what he's faced this year and how exiting the stage, it's not the best way to go out, is it?
No. Another one that was supposed to be his crowning glory is the Olympics. And of course, that was completely out of his control, but it had been seen as something that could have been managed a little bit more. There was a lot of confusion about whether or not the Olympics would go forward, and it did not. Now there's speculation about what happens next year. Will Japan be able to host the Olympics? And if so, what does that mean for Japan's opening of its borders when they still remain shut to deal with this health crisis? Another issue, of course, is related to COVID and closing of borders. Japan has closed borders like almost all countries to its immediate neighbors, to China, to Korea. The question about reopening those borders is something that Japan will have to look into. But looking at it more broadly, the question about how Japan will move forward in its relations with the United States, with China, with South Korea, those are some of the burning issues that he will leave behind. And
we'll dig into that a little bit further into the broadcast. But Einar, let's talk about the reaction in China. How's this news going over there?
Well, I mean, Abe was a known entity, and China prefers to know who they're dealing with. Obviously, they're looking very carefully at his successors. There was a pretty checkered past going back. There was some feeling that Abe was trying to play it down the middle, which is about as good as Beijing could expect. But at this point, I think people are just looking forward to what his successor is going to do, especially in regard to trade. RCEP is advancing. China is doing a digital currency. They really want to understand how Japan is going to react to that. So they're interested right now in the successor.
It's been a complicated relationship, though. I mean, there were the tussles over the Diaoyu Islands. He did visit the Yakashuni Shrine, where 14 Japanese war criminals are they're laid to rest there. But recently, he was set to hold a state visit by President Xi Jinping. That was going to take place, except for the coronavirus put a monkey wrench in that as well. So talk to us about how he was able to navigate things.
Well, I mean, he's very pragmatic. He came in as a very kind of strong nationalist, strong government. His consistent theme is to try to make Japan strong enough to survive what is looking like a very turbulent future. He had the situation where, Trump is elected. He goes there. He breaks protocol, visits him before he's actually inaugurated, has had 37 phone calls with Trump. It seems to be, trying to appease the U.S. To some degree, this issue about how much payment for troops that are garrisoned in Japan. But he also recognized the reality that the amount of trade with China, the growth of China, and the necessity of having access to the Chinese market. So he's somewhere in between. I mean, emotionally, no one's going to miss him very much. But as I said, for China, it's always about knowing who you're dealing with so they can kind of calculate what's going forward. Now they have to kind of reassess exactly who's going to come in.
Harlan, if there was one area where he really excelled, it was this relationship with Donald Trump. I remember the early stories about the bromance between Macron and Trump, and of course that bromance went on the rocks. But that was not the case with Abe. He really cultivated this, didn't he?
His first visit, he brought a golden golf club. I don't know whether Trump ever used it. But look, you have to look at the context of Abe as prime minister. He was not good the first time. And when he came back, he had three themes. He was going to fix monetary and fiscal policy and try to reform Japan in terms of its economy. He also wanted to have a more nationalistic argument to be able to reform its constitution to give Japan much more of a defense. He was probably more successful in the first two with fiscal and economic policy, but not entirely so. And he was able to navigate these very difficult times. Look, the relations between Japan and South Korea have hardly ever been worse. Dealing with a disruptive president like Donald Trump required a great deal of skill and sophistication and subtlety. And of course, as China has become more nationalistic and aggressive, Japan, who's always been hostile, and Japan and China have always historically been at each other's throats, required some kind of skill. The problem is that whomever replaces Abe will not have the same kind of stage platform, or even, dare I say, charisma, but experience to negotiate and navigate in these very, very difficult times, exacerbated by the coronavirus and COVID-19. And so the issue here is whether or not the disruption that will come with a new successor to Abe will be able to deal with these fundamental issues. The issue facing Japan right now, in my judgment, is how do you have a successor who can cope with all these disruptive problems that they face, from Corona to South Korea to China to the United States, at a time when it is not clear that this pandemic is going to go away, and the impact on societies could be far, far greater when Japanese populations are going to be reduced, the aging problem is going to increase, and there are going to be all sorts of economic problems. I hope that his successor will have the capacity to be able to deal with these issues, but at this stage it is not clear that whomever replaces Abe will have that skill set and experience. And if Japan were to falter, that would be a huge problem for not only the global economy, but international stability, given that the events and what's happening in Asia are being increased as China becomes more aggressive and more nationalistic.
Well, Sourabh, let me ask you about some of the things that Harlan brought up. One of the other areas where he has been successful is his relationship with India. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Abe was always very gung-ho about India, and in fact made a landmark speech during his very first term as Prime Minister in 2007. The atmospherics of the Japan-India relationship have, I would say, exceeded the reality, the material benefits flowing from that relationship. In terms of, they've signed a number of security agreements, but there isn't that much materially important security cooperation between the two sides. They do a lot of naval activities, naval exercises, but if there were to be a contingency somewhere in Asia, the two countries are going to find it very hard to cooperate in situations because their interests are not that aligned at the end of the day. Japan is in East Asia, India is in South Asia. India has a Himalayan border problem with China, which Japan cannot do much about, and India cannot do much in terms of assistance with regard to something in the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. And so it's the relationship has the atmospherics and the warmth, general warmth has been tremendous, but whether it has materially impacted, I have certain doubts about that. Even the economic relationship, I mean, their trading relationship, they have a free trade agreement, but it's very flimsy. I mean, and the amount of trade has actually been regressing. It's not been increasing. But that said, during the Cold War, India and Japan did not have good relations, and Abe has been instrumental in ensuring that Japan-India relationship has crossed a threshold point wherein there won't be a real sliding back. The US, China, I mean, India and Japan are real partners in Asia, but what that really constitutes and means is still up for grabs and up to doubt.
Shihoko, we just heard Sourabh talking about the general warmth between Abe and Modi, and we also talked a little bit about Trump. I know that you've written about this relationship between Abe and Trump, and actually, in some respects, he's helped shape U.S. foreign policy with regards to the Indo-Pacific doctrine by pushing Trump. Talk to us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Right. Well, certainly one of Abe's signature pieces in the foreign policy sphere has been to work together with the United States on a free and open Indo-Pacific. Of course, one of the first things that President Trump did after assuming office was to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the TPP. Abe really took over that and ensured that the TPP finished and was actually implemented even without the United States. And that has really put Japan in a new position. Rather than simply being a rule follower in the international economic architecture, it actually came to be a leader in setting the rules and setting standards. And at a time when the United States was withdrawing from multilateralism, not just in trade, but in the environmental issues, on the security front, Japan really went out of its way under Abe to partner with the European Union, to have a free trade agreement with the EU, to really try to push Japan's own defense capabilities and reconsider its limitations and redefine the Constitution, revise the Constitution so that Japan could play offense as much as defense. That has actually enhanced its partnership with the United States. And I know some of your speakers today they've talked about Abe as a nationalist. I would actually argue that he was very much a realist. The situation that Japan finds itself is that of uncertainty. And the uncertainty comes from a lot of reluctance on the part of the United States to be a Pacific power. Japan needs to really step up in that front and ensure that the international liberal order remains intact and the values that the United States and Japan actually share continue to flourish, even if the United States becomes increasingly a reluctant partner in the Asia-Pacific.
And Einar, I want to get your thoughts on all of this as well.
Well, I mean, quite frankly, the U.S. is retreating from the stage. I agree with my colleague that he has been a realist, but he's also been a bit of a revisionist. All this kind of harking back to his family's past and trying to justify what happened in World War II has been really an impediment for Japan to go forward. I mean, it's ruined relationships with South Korea. It certainly has not helped, as you talked earlier about China's reaction to a number of things that he's done. This kind of mixture of pride and nationalism is going to obscure a little bit his international policies. Domestically, he just has not been able to deliver. He had 3 arrows, he fired 2 of them, never was able to get the last one through. And as a result, Japan is continuing to drift. And now that the world and Japan are facing some very serious economic fallout from COVID-19, it's not clear exactly how they're going to do this. This kind of aggressive fiscal and monetary policy sounds great during an emergency, but this has been going on for so many years now. The question is, when does it stop?
And speaking of aggressive, Harlan had suggested that China's being more aggressive and that perhaps Japan acts as a counterpoint to that. I want to get your thoughts on that. Einar?
Oh, he's going to continue to try to play it down the middle of the line. His successor has to have a kind of new stage. I mean, the current favorite, Suga, has been kind of regarded as the enforcer of the administration. How he handles things is expected to be just kind of the status quo.
Shihoko, he mentioned Suga. He's 71 years old, son of a strawberry farmer. A lot of people are saying he's got the inside track. Is that your assessment too? And who else should we be keeping our eye on?
Well, he's definitely the one who is seen as the person to succeed. Remember, this is a leadership contest within the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. And so what the population at large thinks really doesn't matter. So if it were up to the general electorate, I don't think Suga would be the man. But given that it is within the LDP, and what Suga has done is under this 8-year rule of Abe, he had really worked closely together with his deputy, Taro Aso, as well as Suga as cabinet secretary, and they have remained intact. And so Suga certainly has the experience. He actually understands and wants to push forward the agenda that Abe has established. And he, unlike Abe or Aso, he is not of a political dynasty. And so he will work hard, he's ambitious, he's driven, and he's focused, and he knows how to play the game of politics.
And Sourabh, he'll also have to figure out how to navigate this unique relationship where you try and have good relations with China, but also good relations with the United States. How difficult is that balancing act?
I think that is one of the most difficult balancing acts that any Japanese prime minister is going to have. On the one hand, Japan remains strongly under the U.S. security umbrella, and on the other, China is its most important economic partner in the region, bar none. They had made strides on escalating, and we see that intensifying.
All right,
that will help.
I believe we're having some troubles with the signal. So let me throw that same question to Sourabh. This is really, as she pointed out, a difficult balancing act, isn't it?
It is a very difficult balancing act, and considering that Abe came from the nationalist wing, it was always understood that he was strong on defense and strong on the alliance, and the question was, how was he going to bridge that gap with China? And well, that gap has not really exactly been bridged. It's still pretty wide, and I personally think Abe missed an opportunity when he passed his constitutional reinterpretation, which expanded Japan's self-defense capabilities and the way it could cooperate with the U.S. But these are, to be able to defend yourself better and better is great, but you need to use these as stepping stones to be able to enhance your diplomatic outreach. At the end of the day, good diplomacy is having good neighborhood relations, so you don't become over-dependent on a foreign partner far away, even though the US-Japan alliance is flourishing. And at this time, be it Russia, China, South Korea, relations just are not good. And of course, this doesn't come on Abe's shoulder. I mean, it's a two-way process, and so others also have to answer for that. But he has not been able to thread the balance, and it's going to be hard for Suga to do so also. And I don't see him reaching out to China in any considerable way to to remedy the balance. They'll try to get Xi Jinping over, but I don't think relations are good. And frankly, I think the two sides even have difficulty even putting out a joint statement. They haven't put one out in all these last 8 years. They've been, so it's going to be hard, and we'll just have to see where this goes from there.
Shihoko, technology is not always our friend, but we do have you back. I want to give you a chance to finish up what you were saying.
Right. No, relations between Tokyo and Beijing are not easy. However, remember that they had been pretty bad less than a decade ago when there was a great deal of dispute over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. There had been protests in the streets in China. We're not seeing that. There has been this, better than a rapprochement, there has been this real need for the two sides to work together. And again, this is because of the United States and concerns that both sides have about regional stability and the concerns about what the United States may or may not do. So that will be one of the glues that brings them together.
Einar, can Suga build on that, do you think?
Here's the thing.
Well, I mean,
actually survive. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges. Japan, before Abe's second administration, had a revolving door of prime ministers. So there's a great deal of concern that that might come back again.
Einar, I was throwing that question to you. I'd like to get your thoughts.
Okay. I mean, economically, the world is shifting east. There can be no question about that, and especially under COVID-19. So, you know, Japan has to figure out how it's going to thread the needle in the future. There's going to be change, obviously, well, probably in the United States in this coming election, although people keep saying that Trump will pull it out. I think the numbers are clearly against him overall. So, you know, what does Suga do? Does he have the kind of loyalty that is necessary? Remember, very different kind of a leader. If he is in fact in, he's not to the to the noble table born at all. He'll be seen kind of as an enforcer, somebody who's kind of pushing his way up from the bottom. This does not always sit well in Japanese society. So he's going to have a lot of issues in terms of dealing with his own party, the domestic situation, and then internationally. So at this point, China is going to be watching very, very carefully, try to assess what kind of signals he's sending out. Is he going to continue this kind of situation where he appeases Trump and refuses to kind of openly engage with Beijing, or is he going to start a new chapter, try to create a new reality? And we're going to see a real test of that with RCEP later this year. If Japan takes a leadership role and really leans into that, that could signal a new shift in terms of how Japan sees the rise of the Asian century.
And Harlan, what about here in the United States? Because this relationship, Abe's worked so much on it with Trump, but yet we do have an election coming up in November. And as Einar was saying, right now the polls suggest that former Vice President Joe Biden will win, although we don't know, and we won't know until after November 3rd. What does that relationship look like if it's a Trump administration for a second term or a Biden administration?
Mike, I think this discussion has been really quite optimistic. You've got a transition in leadership, possibly in the United States, which will be profound. You've got Boris Johnson with Brexit. You've got Angela Merkel, who's leaving. So the West has got some very, very real problems. And no matter who wins in the United States, the number of problems that the next president faces are going to be huge. My concern is that China will become more aggressive. China could use the Senkaku Ratu as an issue for a crisis. Look what's happened in Taiwan. And I'm not sure how prepared Japan or the alliance is. At this particular stage, both Moscow and Beijing are practicing what I call disruptive tactics to try to erode the coherence of the alliances. A new prime minister, no matter who he is, will not have the same relationship Abe had with these major leaders. That will take some time to be able to establish. In the case of the United States, that will not happen until sometime well in 2021. And so the new prime minister is going to have a very, very tough road to hoe, especially if China decides that this is a good time to become more aggressive. I am not predicting that China will, but the problem right now is that the so-called Western alliance of liberal democracies is in fundamental freefall, simply because of the lack of leadership from the United States. and the prime minister, whoever he may be, who's going to have to deal with that. This is a really, really difficult time. And the prospect, if things really get worse, of Japan deciding that it may have to have a nuclear option is not something that can be disregarded. Nobody would have said that 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. But right now, the disruptions are so severe and so tectonic, intensified by COVID-19, that anything could happen. And the new prime minister better be prepared for these events, because there's going to be, I think, very, very little backup in Washington. If Trump wins, it will be America first, and Japan should not think it's going to be benefiting from that. And if Joe Biden wins, it's going to take probably close to a year for his administration to be filled out, given the nature of the confirmation process and how long it takes. So I am forecasting 2021 is not likely to be a happy time, and the prime minister, whomever he may be, should be prepared to deal with rather bad contingencies than better ones.
And Einar, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, this suggestion that perhaps China might be more aggressive moving forward.
Well, this is the difficulty that's happening in the world today. With all the pressures out there, countries are looking at their options and they're reacting defensively. And that's unfortunately being interpreted by every other country that these countries are acting aggressively. And this is not just true of Japan. You can look at India, you can look almost all over the world. I mean, China is not interested in a destabilized world. It needs, very, very robust trade in order to pursue its idea of kind of having this moderately prosperous society. So, this idea that China wants to act aggressively and upend the world order, I think is, I would disagree with Harlan on that, although I do understand his pessimism. As I said before, there is an open door. It's trade. RCEP is going to be a very good indication of how that's going to go. And it's either you want to go forward or you want to go back. Revisionism is not going to change the future, unfortunately.
Mike, can I add, I think China will be forced to take actions it does not want to take. I entirely agree that China does not want to do these things,
right,
but events are likely to conspire against these different countries.
Actually, Harlan, I apologize, but we've run out of time. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. And that is all the time we have for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu. Thanks so much for joining us.